I'm Mark Golub, and the Israeli elections remain in the news throughout the Jewish world. What will the next coalition government look like? What will it mean for U.S.-Israeli relations? Will it have any impact at all on American Jewry? Well, for some answers, we're extremely pleased to have on our phones right now from our nation's capital, the Washington Bureau Chief of the JTA, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, Ron Kampeas. Ron, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
So, Ron, you saw the election results, and I guess the place to begin is, as you see the way in which, the coalition is likely to form, do you think it will have any impact, or how is it being read by the American administration?
Well, I think the first thing they're looking at is Yair Lapid, the centrist party leader who emerged as a big winner with 19 seats from not having had a party. They're looking at his PAC statements, which, on the one hand, emphatically reject any division of Jerusalem and embrace settlers as heroes, but on the other hand, also embrace a two-state solution, calls for withdrawals from territory, and they're seeing that this is going to be a government that's much more, probably going to be much more amenable to renewing talks with the Palestinians than its predecessor was. Renewing talks under the terms that the American administration favors, which include addressing at least a slowdown in settlement building.
You know, Ron, I need you to help our audience place what you do. You obviously are reporting on anything that happens out of our nation's capital, and I assume you're staying on top of anything of a Jewish nature that you hear from the Senate, from the House, and from the White House. Are you also trying to take the pulse of American Jewish leaders as it relates to the administration and other issues facing Washington?
Oh, yeah, for sure. That's one of the things I do. I speak to Jewish leaders about how they interact with the Congress and with the White House.
So, what are you hearing from not inside the American administration or Congress, but from within the Jewish leadership that you speak to and you have contact with? What's their reaction to the fact, for example, that Netanyahu, who still won far clear and away, but he lost 25% from what he and his coalition with USIsrael Beitenu had in the prior government. What's your sense of the American Jewish leadership's take of the results?
My sense is that there's a sense of relief in that everybody had anticipated, very wrongly as it turns out, that there would be a lurch rightward. That
yes.
Netanyahu and his party, Likud Beitenu, would get together with Jewish Home and that they would write off the two-state solution. And now American Jewish organizations are able to turn towards the American public and say, look, this is not a country that's lurching rightward. This is a country with a very strong and resilient center. It looks a lot more than the United States than some critics of Israel would have you believe.
Mm-hmm. Ron, we should also place you. You have a home in Washington, D.C. You also have a home in East Talpiot, I believe. Is that true?
That's right.
And for those who may not know, East Talpiot is in East Jerusalem. And as you look at the way in which the Israeli government, prior to this election, and now we're going to have a new coalition government, if someone said to you, Ron, not only as an American, but as somebody who is intimate with the Israeli scene, how do the Israeli people and what does the Israeli government feel about the two-state solution?
I would say that, in theory, you see it in polling, they still back it. They still want the two-state solution. I think that they're just profoundly skeptical of the ability of the Palestinians to deliver because, first and foremost, because you've got such a divided Palestinian entity. You've got somebody on the West Bank, Mahmoud Abbas, who is willing to talk and is willing to advance issues along towards a two-state solution, and you have a completely rejectionist entity in the Gaza Strip, one that not only doesn't recognize the state of Israel, doesn't even recognize the right of Jews to live in the area. It's like they're regressing beyond from where the PLO was 30 or 40 years ago. When the PLO would sort of talk about a single state where Jews could live alongside Palestinians.
Now, I hear the same thing, exactly the same thing that you just summarized. And one of the things that we learned when we were with the Israeli consulate as the election results were being thrown up on the television screen was that the Israelis seemed to feel that the issue of the two-state solution, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, even the issue with Iran, did not drive this election, that there is so much consensus on these issues within the Israeli public that when it came time to voting this time, the issues that drove the electorate had more to do with domestic issues than the larger international issues. And therefore, the questions of the economy and who would be better to, in somehow, move Israeli society and the economy forward were more central in this election than many of us here in America came to believe. Do you buy that analysis of these election results?
Oh, for sure. If you looked at the way that that all of the parties campaigned, they campaigned on the social issues, the ones you mentioned in terms of the income gap and the difficulties of Israelis in buying, young Israelis in buying housing.
Yes.
But also, and the other one was the issue of service in the military, with a new emphasis on getting both the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, and Israeli Arabs to do some kind of service. Those are both big issues in this election.
Again, I think you say it so perfectly. What occurs to me, therefore, and I really want to hear what you have to say on this, Ron, why would anyone look at these elections and think they have any impact on whether Israel will or will not be more open to negotiations with the Palestinians?
I think it's because if it comes up again, that's the thing. If it comes up again, what are the circumstances that it's going to come up again? Mm-hmm. Again, you have the centrist party that is amenable to working with with Benjamin Netanyahu, Yair Lapid's party, rejects preconditions, and Hamas doesn't want to come to talks at all, of course, and Abbas wants to return to talks with a settlement freeze. So things are pretty much where they were. I don't think that there's going to be much of an immediate impact in any case. The issue is more if further down the line, and if this government lasts, which is a whole other question because it's going to be a delicate and difficult coalition to manage. That should the Obama administration find an opening through which to advance the peace process, I think they see the current government or the potential government as being more amenable to that than they thought. But you're right. The emphasis is on domestic issues, on social issues.
So do you think, Ron, there will be any significant change in U.S.-Israeli relations as a result of whatever new coalition comes out of what we expect in some way a Bibi Netanyahu and a Yair Lapid-led coalition?
Yair Lapid wants to be foreign minister. That's what he's saying now. And just to the degree that you'll have a much different interlocutor coming to Washington and the way that personalities interact, there'll be a change. It's difficult to see what kind of change. I mean, Yair Lapid is very Western-looking, very American in his outlook. He's a television host. He's a talk show host. I think he probably understands this country very well, and so that's going to distinguish him from his predecessor, Avigdor Lieberman, if he becomes foreign minister. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Ehud Barak, the defense minister, actually carried a lot of the foreign ministry water during the last administration. And Yair Lapid's going to be different from Barak in that he's younger, and again, he's more telegenic. He's maybe better able to go on television and explain Israel's positions in American English in the same way that Netanyahu has been so successful at doing.
Incidentally, do you have dual citizenship? Could you have voted in this election?
I could have had I been living in Israel, but Israel doesn't allow expatriate voting except for diplomats in the merchant marine.
So if you were in Israel, you would have voted?
Sure, I fulfill my civic duty. Absolutely.
Okay. And, it's not fair to ask you anymore that it would be fair to ask you whom you voted for in the American election. It's not fair to ask you on national television, whom would you vote for? But so I want to ask it in a slightly different way. Had you been in Israel at the moment, would this have been for you and your family, your wife? Would this have been a critical election to you, or would it have been ho-hum?
I think this would have been a critical election, but in the same way that every election is critical in Israel. The country is so divided that it always goes either way. And remember, this is a wildly volatile electorate. Netanyahu came back from. People are saying, oh, look, he went down to 31 seats, but he came up from 12 seats in 2005.
Yes.
It can go either way. Every vote counts in that country.
Ron, what do you make of the demise, the virtual demise of Kadima party, which in the last election had more seats even than Likud?
I think, the one thing that these new parties, going back to the centrist party that was established in the Dash, that was established in the 1970s, the one thing that, makes them come and go is that they don't have institutions. They're not embedded in the Israeli body politic. The Labour Party has branches in every city. Likud has branches in every city. There are families where the kids will vote like their parents and grandparents did. You just have those parties, even when they seem down for the count, they always manage to rally because they have institutional bases. There's a lot of sentimental attachment. And the centrist parties are mostly, I wouldn't say personality cults. That's a little bit strong, but they're focused on one or two people who are popular at that particular moment in time, and then they become politicians, and the sheen goes away, and people tend to go back to the traditional parties.
Do you think it's possible that Yair Lapid will be a sort of a flash in the pan, one-time wonder, and gone?
That's absolutely possible. It depends on how much substance he brings to his to his role in government now. He's no longer a commentator from the outside. He's a politician who has to deliver.
It's interesting, Ron, many American Jews don't know him at all. And as you say, he is very articulate, very good-looking, very personable. It will be interesting to see how American Jewry relates to him.
I think so. And I think, one of the tensions over recent months with the Netanyahu government, between the American Jewry and the Netanyahu government, and this has gone so much under the radar because, as you say, the media here tends to focus strictly on Israel-Palestinian. One of the tensions has to do with the role of women in Israel, the status of women, and civil liberties, issues like that. And I think his face will certainly be very presentable. Again, like I said, there's a degree of relief in the American Jewish establishment, and I'm sure that's part of it. He's got, I forget how many women he has on his list, but I think it's almost half of the 19 people who are going to get into the Knesset are women, including some young and very articulate activists.
That's a very important point, and you make me think that we hear very often in the United States as well, it's always the same people. It's been especially true in Israel. It seems like politicians, once they become part of the process, are there forever. But here you have Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett, both of whom Naftali Bennett did not do as well as the right had hoped he would do, but they both are rising stars at the moment. It will be interesting to see if in some way there is a new generation of leadership coming to the fore in the state of Israel.
Yeah, I think that's what's happening now. I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing an exhaustion with the existing leadership. I mean, Netanyahu has been a high-profile politician since the late 1980s. He was first elected prime minister in 1996. That's 17 years ago. That's a long time. People want to see new faces.
All right, there's something else I've been meaning to ask you. I think you might be able to give me a unique perspective here. Jeffrey Goldberg wrote a very controversial article after an interview with President Obama just before our own American elections, in which Obama was, first of all, he was not very flattering to Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the president said that Israelis don't know what's in their own best interest. And people have questioned whether that interview published by Jeffrey Goldberg had any impact on how Israelis voted either for or against Prime Minister Netanyahu? Do you think that article contributed in any way to the lower than expected vote that Netanyahu received in this election?
I think that it's hard to say so far. We'll have to see until people dig deeper into the polling questions. But certainly, there's a kind of contradiction. I think that my friend Shai Franklin also pointed out in a column that he wrote with Israelis. They like Israeli prime ministers who stand up to Americans. They do, but they also want to preserve the American-Israeli relationship. And to the degree that maybe they're not so sympathetic to President Obama, they were even less sympathetic to George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush's father in 1992. But that didn't stop the tense relations that Yitzhak Shamir had with that Bush from hurting him in that election, even though that election was fought mostly on economic issues. So, it definitely might have had that effect, especially coming after Obama, appeared to stand by Israel, or did stand by Israel in the whole Gaza war in terms of supplying the Iron Dome, which is not to say that Israelis have turned around in their opinions and have become big fans of the president, but I think they see him as more solidly in Israel's camp they might have previously, and they don't want to squander that.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've given us your reaction about the coalition government, the new potential coalition government, as it applies to the peace process itself. What about on settlement construction? Do you think the new government will take a different tact on that issue?
If I were to guess, and it's hard to say. We don't know who's going to be in the new government. But I would guess that if there's a slowdown, it'll be strictly in the West Bank. There's just not a party that's likely to make it into this government that would want to touch Jerusalem, because it is a consensus issue in the Jewish Israeli electorate, at least. But to the degree that perhaps there will be more pressure to stop expansion and settlements outside of Jerusalem, and certainly I think that there will be pressure to rein in the illegal outposts in the West Bank, outposts that are illegal according to Israeli law.
By the way, as you understand it, during the 10-month freeze, at least it was called a freeze, of settlement growth during the early years of Obama, when there was an attempt to restart the peace process, is it your sense that outside of Jerusalem there was a significant settlement freeze by Netanyahu?
There was. The freeze wasn't so much in actual building during that period. The freeze was in initiatives to build, and that's actually more important in a way for those who would oppose a settlement, because once an initiative sort of enters the bureaucracy, it becomes very difficult to roll back. And in a sense, that was I think the big mistake of the Palestinians in terms of pulling out of that, because even though they couldn't convince Netanyahu to extend the freeze, had they stayed in talks with him, they might have been able to tamp down such initiatives.
Okay.
Go ahead, sorry.
So we change focus a little bit. Do you imagine, Ron, that there will be any change in Israeli-American-Jewish relations as a result of these elections?
Well, like I said, I think that there will be. I think that like I said, this all depends, of course, on Netanyahu and Lapid getting together and putting together a solid and stable coalition. If you have a party that, like I said, is westward looking in its outlook, like Yesh Atid, there is a future. And if you have a leader of that party like Yair Lapid, who's very modern and who's very liberal in his policies, yes, I think that that's going to have a very salutary effect on relations with the American Jewish community, because the American Jewish community is mostly liberal, and it does appreciate the diversity that somebody that Lapid embraces.
And what about what you hear again when you speak to Jewish leadership? Is Jewish leadership pleased with Lapid, and do they imagine this coalition government may be one that they can support even with more enthusiasm? Or do you hear anybody, especially those on the right end of the Jewish spectrum, do you hear from them any kind of concerns?
I haven't heard any concerns yet. I think mostly what I hear is that people want to get to know him better.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so turn for a moment now with me to the American scene itself, Ron. Many American Jews, and Israelis as well, were very upset with the president's choice of Chuck Hagel as the next Secretary of Defense. And the gay community was upset. And the African community was upset also. Do Jewish leaders you speak with feel that the Hagel choice indicates anything about where the president is going in his second term?
I think that they're concerned about the signal it sends to Iran in terms of having as part of his national security team two men that have expressed skepticism about the efficacy of sanctions, have been wary of a military strike. I'm not sure that people they're worried more about what that broadcast. I'm not sure whether they're worried so much about what it means for the president, because if you look at his first pick for Secretary of State, Susan Rice, she is very aggressive on Iran. That would have sent the opposite signal had he been successful in getting her through, approved. So people aren't so much concerned about the president's intentions. They're worried that he might be a little tone deaf. That's what I'm sensing.
Yes, there are many, even Democrats, who speak to me off the record and say to me they don't understand why the president chose someone whom, after there was a trial balloon, received sort of like low grades from not only the Jewish community, but the black community, African-American community, as well as the gay community. And there was this feeling that why did he have to push this nomination at this point in time? As you look at the entire American administration in its formation, as it begins to form its own second four-year term, is there anything that troubles you about American policy at the moment?
Well, it's not my job so much to be
That's true.
To be troubled. I think that there's not going to be much more different in terms of the thing that's been afflicting the American body politic over the last couple of years. You've got a divided government. You've got a steadfastly conservative and Republican House of Representatives, and you've got a president who's actually shifted to the left. I think his first term was relatively centrist in terms of, let's say, if you look at health care reform, in terms of what Democrats had hoped for in 2008 and what he actually passed in 2010, he shifted to the center. Now if you listen to his inauguration speech, he's shifting more liberal in terms of gay rights, in terms of gun control, and in terms of advancing other economic issues. And so he set himself up for a confrontation with the House, at least, the U.S. House of Representatives, that is no less conservative than it was a few months ago, even though there have been some shifts there. So as far as that goes, I think that's going to be the main concern for Americans, whether the President Obama can resolve his differences with John Boehner, the Speaker, and Eric Cantor, the Majority Leader, and work together.
It's interesting, Ron. There is still such an overwhelmingly liberal thrust to the American Jewish community that when you talk about gay rights and, in essence, the entitlements that this country has made part of its very fabric, and this notion that we somehow want to, wherever we can, help those who are the underclass in our society. All of those things resonate very strongly with Jews across the spectrum. What concerns the American Jewish community when it comes to their specific agenda is whether the president will ever place Israel in a situation where it will be forced to make compromises or, in essence, jeopardize American support on the issue of peace with the Palestinians. And whenever I hear Jews criticize President Obama, it's always about whether he is going to be strong enough in a fight against Iran's attempt to acquire a nuclear weapon? And will he ever force Israel to make compromises that are inappropriate and jeopardize the safety of the state of Israel? Those are the areas which I hear Jews express their concern about. As you talk again to Jewish leadership, as you see this being played out, what's your sense of where you think the administration is going to go in its own relationship to Israel on those two critical areas?
I think that you're going to see more of the same. You're going to see you might see a revival of the tensions regarding the Israeli-Palestinian issue, although maybe less so. I think, one thing that people haven't paid attention to is that the Obama administration is equally as frustrated with the Palestinians as it has been with the Israelis. And so, if anything, I mean, the president of maybe somebody like Yair Lapid in the government will exacerbate their frustrations with the Palestinians for making unilateral moves at the United Nations and for insisting on preconditions to return to the table. So I don't see many tensions there. I mean, the whole issue there is that the sides have to want it, and they don't. Maybe the Israeli side wants it a little more than it did a couple of weeks ago. We'll see how the government looks, but the Palestinians haven't really changed that much. I mean, even now, they suggested before the UN vote that the UN vote itself, that elevated them to non-observer state, that would alleviate their demand for a settlement freeze before they return to talks. Turns out that the Palestinian envoy here to Washington said that afterwards. No way. If anything, they're more emphatic. They want a settlement freeze before they return to talks. So I don't see that being so much of a burr on the U.S.-Israel relationship. The Iran issue, on the other hand, it depends. It depends on how close the Iranians get to the to being nuclear ready. I think that Netanyahu really did something extraordinary in September when he spoke to the General Assembly. He did something very difficult for a leader. He actually set down his red line. Leaders don't like setting red lines because they like room to negotiate. They like a degree of ambiguity. But he was under pressure to set a red line, and he did. And that red line is an Iran that is able to be 93% closer to enriching uranium to 93%, which would make it bomb ready. And the question is, does Iran get close to that, and what happens with the United States if it gets close to that? So that might come back as a source of tension. But certainly, the Obama administration, John Kerry again said today that they are determined to prevent that from happening, to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
Ron Kampeas, you do spectacular work. I don't know if you are yet a household name in the Jewish community, but you should be. And we read you all the time. You're a great reporter, and it's so nice of you to be able to speak to us for a few moments. I really hope you'll let me turn to you often. And kol tuv v'hatzlacha, continued wonderful work in all you do for the JTA and really in many other areas as well. Thank you, Ron, very much.
Thank you. Thank you for calling me.
We'll talk soon.
Okay.
The thoughts of Ron Kampeas, again, who is the Jerusalem Bureau Chief for the JTA, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. As always, please feel free to contribute your own comments. Email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I always look forward to hearing from you. I'd love to be able to read your thoughts and comments on the air. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.